After having forged the great hammer given to Ferrus, the Emperor's Children's Primarch, Fulgrim, would continue to grow a closer and closer bond with his brother, to the point that legends have it that Ferrus earned his legendary moniker, the Gorgon, a title that would echo throughout the galaxy for generations, drawing parallels to an ancient creature from myth and legend, not from a great action or a legendary battle, but as a joke by his beloved brother Fulgrim, the Primarch of the Emperor's Children. As the tale goes, Ferrus epitaph dates back to their first meeting on Terra, and unlike Fulgrim, who reveled in art, architecture, culture, and music, Ferrus was driven by the singular purpose of conquest and lacked interest in little else, seeing these luxuries as wastes of time. This divergence would become even more apparent when the great angel, the Primarch Sanguinius, Lord of the Blood Angels Legion, arrived at the Imperial Palace bearing gifts of exquisite beauty and craftsmanship from Baal. Statues carved from glowing rock, rare gemstones, and artifacts of agrogranite, opal, and tourmaline. Fulgrim would quickly be enchanted by these great treasures, seeing the gifts as things to be delighted in and having a new avenue of kinship with a brother, one who also admired the beauty that could be created by mankind. On the other hand, Ferrus would dismiss these displays as frivolous distractions, insisting that their true and only purpose lay in reclaiming the galaxy for the God Emperor. In response to this, Fulgrim would playfully jest and call him a terrible Gorgon, implying that without an appreciation for beauty, they risked missing the grandeur of the stars they sought to reclaim for their father. From that moment on, the nickname would supposedly stick, as Ferrus would not even rebuff the title given to him by such a close brother. This incident would not just show the contrast in personalities that would go so far as to even be represented amongst these two Primarchs' legions, but it also foreshadowed a diverging path that would eventually lead two of the closest men in the galaxy down a dark and tragic road. Eventually, a fervent zeal would be ignited within the ranks of the Emperor's Children once Fulgrim assumed full command of his legion proper, as they would kneel humbly before their leader. And it seems that as though past glories held little sway over their aspirations, their focus would now be singularly fixated on the future, much to their own detriment. A future where failure and any imperfection was inconceivable. Their pursuit for excellence in warfare would become their paramount obsession, demanding less than nothing from perfection at every turn. Whenever another legion would demonstrate any superior prowess in even the smallest and most obscure aspect of warfare, the Emperor's Children would take it upon themselves to learn those skills, and attempted to match some of the most specialized warriors in the legions of Astartes. They immersed themselves completely in training and study, allowing these pursuits to consume their very beings until mastery was attained. Once mastery was achieved, they would go on to meticulously evaluate and refine their methods, attempting to perfect their new craft. For the Emperor's Children, accomplishments were not victories, if only measured by themselves. An accomplishment would only matter when compared to another. When rival legions received any singular honor, it served both as motivation to surpass them and as a blow to their personal pride, as the legionaries saw themselves as falling short and failing. Such comparisons would often breed jealousy, especially when they lagged behind, and they would hold no end of contempt whenever they surpassed any of their peers. Yet, no matter their successes, the insatiable, gluttonous thirst for perfection remained unquenched. As each day would pass, the achievements of yesterday would hold no value. Each new conquest or refinement was but a mere stepping stone towards a new, unattainable ideal. This would be a foreshadowing to the dark path that would overtake the Third Legion, culminating in atrocities that would validate their obsessive quest for perfection. The precise moment when Fulgrim and the Emperor's children would truly succumb to darkness remains elusive. However, some within Imperial ranks point to Fulgrim's purging of the Xenos species known as a lair, as the pivotal event that would mark their true descent. It is suggested that this incident would become the catalyst that allowed the youngest of the Chaos Gods to ensnare Fulgrim and to initiate the rapid and uncontrolled corruption of his legion, as the historical records would indicate that it would be on a planet officially catalogued as 28-3, the third world brought into compliance by the 28th expedition, where the serpent-like species known as a lair, who were already fully corrupted followers of Slaanesh, the god of excess and pleasure, would reside on. Lairn, the planet's proper name, was an ocean world abundant in vital resources that were deemed as necessary and crucial for the Emperor's Great Crusade. However, even though the Imperium attempted to negotiate with them, going so far as to potentially classify them as a client species, not unlike some of the ones that had been allowed to continue to exist to this day within the Imperium's domains, it seems the lair inhabitants were rather disdainful of humanity's manifest destiny amongst the stars, and would go on to reject diplomacy with violent reprisals, and the Emperor's children took this personally. In response to this, they met aggression with unbridled force, escalating the tensions into an inevitable conflict that would lead to much bloodshed and the extinction of a species, one that would set in motion the downfall of the Third Legion, as within the planet, it seems the allure of power and the whispers of chaos were ever present, and began to influence the Legion as a whole. During the campaign on Lair, another incident that would forever shake the Legion occurred. Chief Apothecary Fabius Bile of the Third Legion made a startling discovery. While examining the corpses of the Lair, he found evidence of extensive genetic engineering amongst the serpentine-like species, with different castes each being tailored through genetic manipulation in order to fulfill specific roles in Lair society. This would be so surprising that he would go on to present his findings to Fulgrim. This was due to Fabius drawing parallels between the Lair's pursuit for biological perfection and the Emperor's children's own quest for excellence. Fabius boldly proposed that while the Emperor's creation of the Astartes was indeed remarkable, it might represent just the beginning of a greater evolutionary path for humanity. He would continue to suggest that by studying and refining their own genetic material, they could surpass their current states and achieve new heights of perfection. Though his frankness could have been perceived as heresy, Fabius was able to argue that the potential benefits would outweigh the risks by a wide margin. In response to this, Fulgrim would consider the apothecary's audacious suggestions, thinking to himself, could they indeed improve upon their own gene seed, that which created the Astartes and made them so formidable? Could the Emperor's creation be improved upon? He believed that striving for perfection was imperative in order to avoid failing the Emperor, so he was easily convinced by Fabius's convictions, leading to Fulgrim granting the apothecary unrestricted authority to pursue his ambitious endeavors. This singular action would be one that the galaxy would regret millennia after its occurrence. During the entirety of the Lairn campaign and afterwards, Apothecary Fabius Bile started making discovery after discovery. Said discoveries would lead to many of the gene-forged creations that Chaos now wields. And eventually, Fulgrim's 28th Expeditionary Fleet would triumphantly claim the entirety of Lairn, wiping out the species, and once the planet was subjugated within its vast oceans, the planet's native reptilian inhabitants had adapted through genetic engineering in order to create beings that could survive solely on the floating coral islands, along with another discovery that seemed to put them on a similar technological level to that of the Imperium. Some of the most advanced anti-gravity generators that the Legion had ever seen were possessed by this same race and used to sustain their vast floating coral islands above sea level. There were even some technological aspects that far outstripped the Imperium. But unbeknownst to Fulgrim and his Emperor's children, the civilization had gained many of these boons in part due to having already fallen prey of the chaos god Slaanesh, the god of pain and pleasure, excess, and the numbness that would follow said excess. At the heart of this civilization was a centralized nexus, and within said centralized nexus lay a malevolent artifact of chaos, a single-edged demon blade, housing a greater demon of Slaanesh. As it seems, through this was that the influence of Slaanesh had permeated throughout the entirety of the species, and it was in part evident due to the layer's insatiable cravings for intense sensory experiences, including vibrant colors that had been heretofore unseen, and cacophonous sounds, and the perverse enjoyment they had derived from these extreme sensations would greatly mirror the indulgent self-destruction in which soon the Emperor's children would follow. Oblivious to the perilous realities that surrounded him and his sons, Fulgrim ordered his legion and the allied forces of the 28th Expeditionary Fleet to swiftly take the planet and claim it for Terra as soon as possible, and he would succeed. And it was during the eradication of this species and the conquest of the planet proper that Fulgrim and a Astartes contingent would stumble upon the temple dedicated to Slaanesh, on top of which was the Lair Blade, whose power was wielded by the fanatical final contingent of defenders of the Lair species. Once they had been cleared out, Fulgrim would discover a mysterious artifact, a circular block of veined black stone, encasing a tall silver sword with a gently curved blade and an incredibly ornate gemstone in its pommel. This blade bore not only the greater demon of Slaanesh, but it was one of such perfection that Fulgrim could physically not help himself. It would be against his very nature to allow such perfection to lie, unheeded to and unattended to, as he was ensnared by its whispers, which would subtly corrupt his thoughts and his very soul towards the service of Slaanesh. Gradually, this blade would become more and more favored, causing him to all but leave his cherished fire blade behind, the gift that had connected him to Horus Heresy, his brother. Though initially Fulgrim would dismiss the whispers as a reflection of his own strained psyche, Fulgrim would eventually realize that he had been unwittingly seduced by its promises of power. And the way that he would eventually discover this and the corruption of the blade itself was after persistent entries from his corrupted brother Horus, who himself was being influenced by the ruinous powers following his injury on Davin's moon. Fulgrim would also fall to chaos in short order, as he found his allegiance falling in line with that of the Prince of Pleasure, who promised Fulgrim and his Astartes the path to ultimate perfection, unfettered by the limits and restraints of morality, and allowing them to endlessly indulge in self-obsession. Following the conclusion of the conflicts on Lairn, casualties in all the Third Legion's campaigns would significantly lessen, allowing Chief Apothecary Fabius more time to dedicate directly to his clandestine research, and almost guaranteeing complete secrecy for his experiments, as he would relocate himself and his research facility in its entirety aboard the Ardranus, a strike cruiser under the command of Lord Commander Eidolon. Though initially basic, the facility would be expanded upon with Eidolon's endorsement via amassing a diverse and nearly unending array of specialized equipment. However, even though he allowed this, and he even aided Fabius, Eidolon would take keen interest in the work itself, as Fulgrim had briefed him on the ambitious mission which was taken upon by the Chief Apothecary, and eventually Eidolon would volunteer the first subject for full augmentation upon his return from his arduous duties, hoping to be able to enhance his speed and lethality under Bile's genetic manipulations. as he aspired to become Fulgrim's indispensable lieutenant, his true right hand, surpassing all previous Emperor's children. It was during this period where the aspects of corruption would become more and more evident within the Emperor's children. Self-obsession grew rampant. Modifications became the standard. The drive for perfection became all-consuming. Then, during the later stages of the Great Crusade, the Iron Hands Legion would encounter the Diasprex, a nomadic civilization comprising of humans and Xenos, living aboard floating fleet vessels, and once the Iron Hands had shared the imperial truth of mankind, they would go on to extend an offer to the humans within the Diasprex, so they may join the Imperium, and seeing as essentially half their culture was told to shove off, they staunchly declined, and in response to this rejection, the Iron Hands, driven by their uncompromising nature, initiated a campaign to eradicate this confederation of malcontents. However, the nomadic fleet proved to be too adept at naval warfare to singularly eliminate, skillfully evading the decisive engagements which Ferrus Manus needed in order to win, all the while the nomads were able to deal significant damage upon the Iron Hands strike cruiser Ferrum over several months. Facing mounting challenges, Ferrus Manus sought the aid of the Emperor's children, in particular those of the 28th Expeditionary Fleet, those under the direct command of his brother. Together they would form a formidable joint imperial strike force aimed at the relentless Diasprex, who, despite knowing full well that they were being hunted by a powerful Imperium fleet bent on their eradication, refused to abandon their sector of space, which was fortified by hidden solar collection arrays, which were crucial for fueling their ships. Upon uncovering these vital energy sources, the Imperium's forces decided to target them in order to provoke an open conflict, one which they would have the advantage in. And it seems that this desperate engagement marked another crucial turning point, as a human-Xenos alliance fought to preserve their existence with a tenacity that the Space Marines had not expected. During the tumultuous naval battle, Fulgrim's personal gunship, Firebird, would come under severe fire and found itself in dire straits. Responding swiftly to his brother's distress, Ferrus Manus' flagship battle barge, Fist of Iron, rushed to aid his favorite brother in his hour of need. In a daring display of both camaraderie and skill, Ferrus would personally lead a decisive boarding action alongside the Emperor's children, unleashing a torrent of unstoppable devastation upon the Diasprex troops aboard their vessel. However, amidst the chaos of battle, and despite having the fresher troops' greater numbers, victory slipped from Fulgrim's grasp when one of his commanders would seize control of the enemy ship's bridge, rather than himself. This unexpected turn of events left Fulgrim embittered towards Ferrus Manus because it was due to his actions that he had been delayed, and that it was his son, not Fulgrim, who claimed the bridge of the ship, unable to grasp that Ferrus' intent was selfless, due to his worry that his brother may be in danger, rather than any form of pride. It seems that Fulgrim only saw this as an unnecessary loss of both face for himself and lives for his legion. This was in no small part influenced by the insidious demon within the lair blade, twisting his thoughts, as Fulgrim interpreted Ferrus' actions through a lens of personal ambition rather than brotherly sacrifice and affection. What Fulgrim had perceived as Ferrus' critical remarks and jests aimed at deflating the Phoenician's own ego were in truth gestures in order to preserve humility and present an olive branch of camaraderie and brotherhood. And as chaos had already tightened its grip on Fulgrim, transforming his noble ambitions into self-serving desires, he would fail to recognize the genuine camaraderie and brotherly love that had defined Ferrus Manus' actions on that day. Eventually, Malcador the Sigillite would even comment on the tragedy of the fall of the Emperor's children, as he so eloquently observed that their tragic flaw lay not in their fall from grace, but the unattainable quest for perfection and the inherent flaws that lay within this quest. Blind to the imperfections that they would create within themselves as they seek to perfect and reach an unattainable ideal, they would descend into the ruinous grasp of chaos, leaving behind only a legacy of flawed magnificence, tarnished by their ultimate betrayal. Members of the Inquisition delving into fragmentary imperial records would go on to posit that the demon-influenced layer blade, wielded by Fulgrim, began to impose greater and greater effects on his very soul, which extended not only to the Primarch, but also the Emperor's children under his command would be forced to face the full corrupting embrace of the chaos-tainted blade, despite not being in their possession. Amidst those Primarchs grappling with corruption, Fulgrim would find himself unwittingly drawn to the tragedy of the Horus Heresy, in particular during an encounter with Eldrad Ulthwain, a venerable Eldar Farseer from Craftworld Ulthwé on the Maiden World of Tarsus. Eldrad had sought to warn Fulgrim about Horus's dire predicament, as he had been wounded by the Kinbrach Anathame, which was wielded by Eugene Temba, the planetary governor of Davin, who had been already in the influence of the plague god Nurgle, the chaos god of decay and pestilence. Horus's injury had provided an opening for the chaos gods to ensnare the War Master's very soul, in a similar way to that which was being unknowingly done to Fulgrim. However, Fulgrim's close bond with Horus, due to the years that he had served alongside him when his legion was attempting to recover, led to cries of denial and anger, which were further stroked by the insidious whispers of the demon blade, which urged Fulgrim to reject the Eldari's warnings. Driven by rage and the corrupting influence of the blade, Fulgrim launched himself in a full frontal assault upon Eldrad and his retinue, all the while being supported by a loyal cadre of Emperor's Children's captains and his elite Phoenix Guard. In the ensuing skirmish, the Emperor's Children claimed the lives of revered Eldari figures such as Wraithlord Karen Goldhem, and an avatar of Cain was strangled to death by the Primarch, along with Eldrad and his forces being dealt a devastating blow as they would be forced to withdraw, sorrowfully acknowledging that chaos had already irreversibly ensnared yet another of the Mon Kai's Primarchs. And it would seem that the Eldar's words left a bitter mark on Fulgrim's psyche, which was exacerbated by the insidious influence of his demon blade. In response to what he had perceived as treachery, and swayed by his growing darkness, Fulgrim would command the 28th Expeditionary Fleet to deploy devastating virus bombs on several exquisite Eldar Maiden worlds, in a ruthless act that was in essence illogical, and driven almost completely due to the paranoia that the blade had been instilling in Fulgrim. Shortly thereafter, Fulgrim would attempt to confront Horus in person, seeking an explanation to the accusations laid by the Eldar regarding Horus's allegiance to chaos. However, as Fulgrim had taken some precautions after witnessing the Eldar's warnings, he had actually been going with Fireblade to meet Horus. Unfortunately, one of his sons had seen this as a potential mistake by his father, and chosen nobly to bring him his apparent favorite sword. Once he was again in the influence of the blade, he would not be able to let go. And it was due to this that when he confronted Horus in person, seeking the explanation, Chaos, along with Horus's immense charisma, deftly convinced Fulgrim of the righteousness that embracing chaos was, as loyalty to the chaos gods was the only path that Fulgrim truly had to perfection. And it was here that Fulgrim's loyalty was shattered, as he no longer sought perfection in order to complete the Emperor's grand design, but rather in a fervent belief that chaos was the only thing that would allow humanity to gain the perfection he so desired. Under the sway of his newfound convictions, Fulgrim came to view the Emperor and his imperial truth as impediments to humanity's ascension to its full potential. Strangely enough, he embraced chaos wholeheartedly in one swift move as the key to unlocking humanity's ultimate destiny. And as a token of trust and brotherhood, Horus bestowed upon Fulgrim the same blade, the Kinbrek Anathame, which had been infused with the deadly corrupting essence of Nurgle, which had nearly claimed the War Master's life on the moon of Davin. And this would be a testament to the malevolent alliance formed between Horus, Fulgrim, and the ruinous powers of chaos. In obedience to Horus's directive, Fulgrim would go on to face Ferrus Manus aboard the battle barge Fist of Iron in an attempt to sway his closest and dearest brother to join the nascent rebellion against the Emperor. And while the bulk of his forces marched to rendezvous with Horus and the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet on Isfahan, Fulgrim, accompanied by a small contingent aided by the 52nd Expeditionary Fleet of the Iron Hands, would go on to reclaim Caldeus IV from the Orcs, who had recently invaded and taken it. It seems that Fulgrim had harbored a deep hope that amidst the camaraderie and his bond with Ferrus Manus, he would be able to prevail despite their ideological differences and bring Ferrus into the fold. However, the encounter upon Ferrus's sanctum within the flagship led tensions to escalate swiftly into violence, as Ferrus, wielding his silvery necrodermis hands, clashed with Fulgrim, shattering the gift that he had given him, Fireblade, in a ferocious exchange. But unfortunately, the explosive aftermath led to Ferrus being unconscious and teetering on the brink of death. Driven by the insidious whispers of the Demon Blade, Fulgrim sought to end his brother's opposition with Forgebreaker, the formidable warhammer that had been gifted to him by Fulgrim. Yet in a moment where the true Fulgrim shone, the Primarch faltered, and he would be unable to strike down his oldest brother and friend. Despite the demon's relentless urgings and desperate pleas, Fulgrim would then emerge from Ferrus's inner sanctum as he signaled his Phoenix Guard, who had ruthlessly executed Ferrus Manus's loyal Morlock Terminators and severed the Iron Hands Primarch from his last line of defense, to follow him. And even though this was a rather tragic encounter, it must be noted that it indeed showed that some of the original Fulgrim was still there, fighting to be freed from the Demon Blade's influence. And during the aftermath of the tumultuous confrontation aboard the Fist of Iron, the Emperor's children, under Fulgrim's increasingly corrupt leadership, would go on to nearly claim the life of the Iron Hands' first captain, Gabriel Santor. However, the tides would be turned, as in a daring escape, Fulgrim fled aboard his personal assault craft, the Firebird, all the while orchestrating a surprise assault from his personal flagship, the battle barge Pride of the Emperor, and its escort vessels. This sudden and full-out betrayal would go on to cripple the Iron Hands' 52nd Expeditionary Fleet, allowing the 3rd Legion to slip into the warp, bound for the Isfahan system, where Horus and the traitor legions awaited. With their allegiance against the Emperor fully sealed, the insidious corruption of chaos spread like a contagion, a disease, throughout the Emperor's children. Beginning with Fulgrim, the corruption seeped into its highest echelons, leaving almost no one untouched within the Legion, ensnaring Lord Commanders and descending through their ranks, from company captains to squad sergeants. All but a minority, a scant few handfuls, of Emperor's children's Astartes would succumb to the allure of Slaanesh, forsaking their loyalty to the Emperor in the pursuit of perfect hedonism and unrestrained sensual indulgence. Thus, the once noble quest for excellence and perfection of the 3rd Legion had become perverted into a dark desire for self-gratification and excess, marking a tragic and irreversible shift towards chaos that would forever alter the course of some of the finest warriors of the Imperium and seal the fate of many through the Horus Heresy. After overseeing the compliance action on the world designated 28-4, Lord Commander Eidolon of the Emperor's Children had undergone elective augmentative surgeries performed by Chief Apothecary Fabius Bile. This procedure involved the implantation of a modified tracheal device that was integrated with Eidolon's vocal cords, enabling him to emit a paralyzing shriek akin to the war cries that made the lair so deadly to the Legion and their mortal counterparts. Initially outraged by the notion of Xenos technology being what would be used in his body, Eidolon vehemently opposed Fabius's surgical interventions. Despite his protests, Fabius would persist, citing the full and unlimited authorization from Primarch Fulgrim himself and Eidolon's prior consent to the enhancements. Eidolon would later demonstrate the efficiency of his new implant during a critical engagement on Isstvan Extremis, the outermost planet of the Isstvan system, leading his first company alongside the Death Guard battle captain Nathaniel Garrow's 7th Company against the traitorous forces, in particular when they were facing a Slaaneshi mutant known as a War Singer. The incident would occur right after Garrow had been taken down during battle, leading Eidolon to unleash his newfound ability using a devastating sonic attack to neutralize the War Singer and secure victory. In retrospect, Eidolon's utilization of the technology marked a pioneering step towards what would later become known as Noise Marines, since this implement would be used by many of them. Following the cleansing on Lairen, it seems the corruption had fully seeped through the 3rd Legion. Yet, Lord Commander Vesperian, a stalwart adherent to the Legion's ideals of honor and perfection, would go on to resist the pervasive arrogance and hubris that was increasingly plaguing his brethren. Concerned for the future of his legion, Vesperian sought counsel from the like-minded battle brothers such as 2nd Company Commander Solomon Demeter over many a month. And it must be noted that Vesperian was also present during the fateful meeting between Primarch Fulgrim and Eldrad Earlthwain. And while he obeyed Fulgrim's order to attack the Eldar delegation, viewing it as necessary to maintain their loyalty to the Imperium, he would hold some reservations. Weeks later, Fulgrim's fleet, including Vesperian's own cadre, were directed by the Council of Terra to rendezvous with the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet to investigate the reports of the War Master's injuries. Following the delegation to the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, Fulgrim would announce to his senior commanders his intentions to lead a small contingent to aid Ferrus Manus on Calanus IV in the Calanus system to ostensibly purge the world of orc infestation. Meanwhile, the War Master would take hold of the rest of the 63rd and go to Isstvan to supposedly quell an emerging rebellion. Accompanying them were the Death Guard and World Eaters, forming what would be otherwise seen as a formidable alliance of those loyal to the Emperor. While the legionaries cheered at the prospects of fighting alongside their brethren, Fulgrim's initial amusement soured as he contemplated how many of these warriors under Vesperian's leadership could be used to enhance the War Master's forces, and how many would have to be eliminated. This was due to Vesperian holding large reservations towards the more recent actions of his Primarch and Fabius Bile, as he had forbade all the troops under him from partaking in Fabius's chemical enhancements or augmentative surgeries. Fulgrim and Bile had gotten information that this had happened, condemning almost all of them to perish on Horus's trap on Isstvan III. Once more, it seems some remnant of Fulgrim would attempt to come to the surface, as he was grappling with a mixture of guilt and anticipation, which would lead him to a thought, rather belated but seemingly valid in his mind, that removing Vesperian earlier could have spared many lives. As the massacre on Isstvan III unfolded, Horus's forces and those loyal to him would be purged of weakness and turned into a lethal instrument aimed at the heart of the Imperium's so-called corruption. Despite his noble efforts and intention, Vesperian and many of his men would meet their demise following the 3rd Legion's operation and their placement under Horus's command. However, his resolve to do something, anything really, would be solidified after he had witnessed the abandonment of Solomon Demeter's second company by Captains Kherson and Vasaron, as Vesperian and his second company headed towards the Isvan system to join the forces of the other legions in pacifying the supposed rebellions on Isvan III. Vesperian seized a crucial opportunity, as he would go on to confront Fulgrim in his stateroom, bravely voicing his concerns about the Legion's moral decay and the deviation from Fulgrim's and the Legion's founding principles. It was a tragic revelation for Vesperian, who realized just too late that when he had gone to speak to his Primarch, his father had already been too deeply held in the clutches of chaos to be saved, and driven by the sinister whispers of the demon-possessed Lair Blade, Fulgrim callously ended Vesperian's life, thrusting the anathema into his neck. This was one of Fulgrim's greatest betrayals, not of a brother, but of one who was genetically loyal to him to a fault, his son. Before the Horus Heresy openly initiated and Horus started his rebellion against the Emperor, a pivotal moment arose to purge loyalist factions from the Astartes legions under Horus's command. This would occur via the use of Isvan III's planetary governor, who had succumbed to the corruption of the chaos god Slaanesh, whose cultists had long operated clandestinely on the planet ever since its initial imperial conquest. He would be pushed into declaring independence, giving Horus carte blanche to conduct a large-scale military operation in order to reclaim the world, in particular its capital city. And even though the order came from the Council of Terra, it was almost entirely influenced by Horus's own treacherous ambitions. Although the legions under his direct control, the Sons of Horus, the World Eaters, the Death Guard, and the Emperor's Children, had already largely turned traitor and embraced chaos, it seemed a significant portion of each legion had remained loyal. These segments of still loyal Astartes were mainly Terran-born Space Marines, initially recruited and having served directly under the Emperor himself. Under the guise of restoring imperial order, Horus had created a strategy that would put those who would feel most enthused about serving with each other, once again, those loyalists born from Terra, together on the planet. After subjecting Isvan III to a prolonged orbital bombardment, Horus would dispatch all the known loyalists to the planet's surface in order to secure its compliance, which realistically, such numbers for a singular, already crippled capital should have keyed off many of the great minds within the Legion, in particular those of the Third, who prided themselves on excelling in all aspects of warfare. Yet, at the moment of what appeared to be their penultimate triumph, the capture of the Coral City, the Loyalists found themselves betrayed. From orbit, Horus would unleash the devastating and vile Life Eater virus bombs upon the Astartes in order to annihilate them. Amidst this betrayal, Captain Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children aboard the strike cruiser Andronius uncovered the genocidal plot against the Loyalists. Working with Death Guard Battle Captain Nathaniel Garrow aboard the Eisenstein, Tarvitz would go on to defy the pursuit and descend directly upon Isvan III. There he courageously would go on to warn as many Loyalist Space Marines from all four legions that he could find. And through this act of sacrifice, he enabled many of them to seek shelter before the virus bombs struck, allowing them to survive and mount some amount of resistance to the traitors. However, the entirety of the civilian population of Isvan found themselves unprotected from this onslaught, as the Life Eater virus bombs were designed to dissolve all flesh upon contact. As they had been unleashed without discrimination, they would quickly claim the lives of 12 billion inhabitants in what would be a horrifying instance, leading the planet to be engulfed in a psychic wave of death, which momentarily disrupted all warp-based technology, including momentarily causing a large flicker and disruption of the powerful Astronomicon beacon across the warp. In the aftermath of this, the Primarch of the World Eaters Legion, Angron, recognizing that the virus bombs had ostensibly failed in wiping out the Loyalists in their totality, was enraged beyond measure. Seeing this as a failure, Angron abandoned all restraints and decided to completely ignore Horus, leading 50 companies of World Eater Trader Marines in a frenzied assault upon the planet's surface. Driven purely by lust and by an unknown devotion to the blood god Khorne, the traitorous World Eaters descended in a savage orgy of violence, disregarding all conventional tactics and strategies, becoming merely Khorne berserkers. Horus, despite his initial frustrations at Angron's impulsiveness, which seemed to jeopardize his carefully laid out plans, seized the opportunity to turn this chaotic situation to his advantage. He would go on to swiftly reinforce Angron's berserk forces with additional troops from the Sons of Horus, the Death Guard, and the Emperor's Children, transforming what could have been a lopsided slaughter of the traitor World Eaters and a major setback for Horus's forces into a victory. As even with the warnings of soul targets, the remains of the legions could not take that many fresh troops. Fortunately, a brave contingent of loyalists, led by Battle Captain Garo aboard the damaged frigate Eisenstein, managed to escape the cataclysm of Isstvan III. Their harrowing flight of the Eisenstein aimed to reach Terra, where they intended to warn the Emperor of Horus's treachery. Meanwhile, on the embattled planet, Loyalist resistance from Captain Tarvitz, Gavriel Loken, and Tariq Torgaradon valiantly resisted the traitorous forces, and despite the initial successes that delayed Horus's plans by 3 crucial months, the remains of the Loyalists were forced to face truly insurmountable odds due to their lack of support, tightened firepower, ammunition, and having to face Primarchs. During the fierce conflict, another tragic betrayal would occur, this time within the Sons of Horus, where Captains Ezekiel Abaddon and Horus Aximund, once brothers in arms with Logan and Torgaradon in the Mournival, turned against them. Aximund ended Torgaradon's life in combat, while Abaddon's attempts on Loken's life would be thwarted by a collapsing building which allowed Loken to witness the devastating orbital bombardment that sealed the Loyalists' fates. Amidst this grim betrayal, and within the Emperor's Children's Legion, further treachery would unfold as Captain Lucius of the 13th Company, later to be known as Lucius the Eternal, turned against his former comrades, led by Tarvitz and Demeter. Driven by an insane jealousy and desire to prove himself to Lord Commander Eidolon and Fulgrim, Lucius slaughtered those once he had fought alongside, those he knew as brothers, earning himself a preeminent place amongst the traitors. As the Loyalists dwindled to a mere few hundred defenders, Horus begrudgingly would prolong the conflict, ordering their annihilation as the Coral City was their last bastion, would be reduced to dust by a final devastating orbital bombardment, marking the tragic end of the Isstvan III atrocity and the deaths of many of the remaining Loyalist Emperor's children. Amidst the gathering storm of the Horus Heresy, a dark symphony echoed, which would change the destiny of the Emperor's Children's Legion forevermore. At its heart was Barika Kinska, a celebrated composer from Terra, whose insatiable quest for new sensations drew her unwittingly into the clutches of Slaanesh. As a remembrancer aboard Fulgrim's flagship, the pride of the Emperor, she was captivated by the corrupting allure of the Xenos world of Lurin and its temple dedicated to the god of excess and pleasure. There, amidst the tainted echoes of the warp, she conceived the Maravigia, a symphony intended to capture the sublime, malevolent essence she had encountered upon the world. Within the opulent theater known as the La Fience aboard the flagship, she unleashed her creation upon an audience that included not only Astartes and the Primarch himself, but many of the mortals serving within the vessel. Crafted with new instruments of her personal design, imbued with both sonic prowess and dark sorceries, her composition transcended mere music. Its cacophony acted as a conduit, bridging the realms of reality and the warp, allowing the sinister energies of Slaanesh to permeate through the gathering. The effects of this performance were both profound and disturbing. including disorientation, heightened sensations and awareness of said sensations in some cases, and lethal impulses amongst many of the audience. This composition marked the genesis of the first true Noise Marines, and the first of the first was Marius Biorsin, and so the Emperor's Children would gain one of their most signature military units, one that would persist to this day within almost every Emperor's Children's warband. Many warriors of the Emperor's Children would be corrupted by this musical symphony, never to be able to return to what they once were. And amidst the haunting echoes of her symphony, more transformations would occur aboard the Pride of the Emperor. As the symphony swelled with its dark intent, chaos mutations seized the audience. Both Astartes and mortal alike were plunged into a maelstrom of hedonistic indulgence and savage violence. It was a spectacle where the uncontrollable emotions of all humanity collided with their basest of instincts, creating a true orgy of sensation and murder. It was excess personified. In the throes of this chaotic crescendo, the very fabric of reality grew even thinner, allowing 5 lesser demons of Slaanesh, demonettes, to materialize, as they seized upon and possessed the bodies of Kinsia and her singer, allowing them to add their own perverse energies to the unfolding carnage, and forever marking them as chaos possessed. Amidst the figurative and literal chaos, some of the Emperor's Children's Astartes moved to take the instruments for their own, and even in their untrained hands, the arcane devices unleashed waves of destructive power upon the audience, becoming the first full band of Noise Marines. Eventually, on Isstvan V, these Noise Marines would be organized as the Cacophony under the command of First Captain Julius Kersom, and they would wield their infernal weaponry with deadly precision in order to slay as many loyalists as possible, being some of the first truly chaos-corrupted Astartes that any loyalist would ever match up against. Amidst the carnage of the Dropsite Massacre on Isstvan V, during the Horus Heresy, a rather climactic clash would unfold, one which would echo throughout the galaxy forevermore. As the loyalists Salamanders, Raven Guard, and Iron Hands would descend upon Isstvan V, eager to confront Horus's traitor legions, the Emperor's Children would join the fray with so much glee that it was palpable to the other legions. The battlefield became their theater of devastation as thousands of drop pods and stormbirds thundered down onto the planet's surface, disgorging warriors ready to spill blood in the name of their respective loyalties. Leading the charge for the Loyalists was Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, who was accompanied by the Salamanders and the Raven Guard, each commanding their own legions with precision and ferocity. Vulcan's forces were set upon to aggress against the left flank of the traitors, while Ferrus Manus, supported by his trusted First Captain Gabriel Santor and the formidable remaining Morlock Terminators, would plunge headlong into the enemy's defenses, all the while Corvus Corax of the Raven Guard would strike from the right, their stealth and speed aimed at disrupting the traitors' formations. And to them it seemed that the odds were grimly stacked. 40,000 loyalists fighting against 30,000 traitor marines. And while this number seems rather big, it is often touted that you need a 3-to-1 advantage in order to eliminate any properly defended forces. However, aware of the loyalists' chosen drop site, Horus had orchestrated a devastating counterassault that would shatter the loyalists' plans. Traitor marines, driven by twisted loyalties and festering hatred, engaged their former comrades in a brutal dance of betrayal. The once pristine battlefield would devolve into a nightmarish Machiavellian play of death and destruction. Massive Titan war engines, embodiments of the machine god's wrath, would stride across the terrain, leaving trails of death and devastation in their wake. Amidst the chaos, the hooded adepts of the Dark Mechanicum would unleash arcane horrors of stolen and forbidden technology, further tipping the scales towards the traitors' favor, as unending rivers of blood covered much of the world. heroes and traitors alike would fall, their names etched into the grim gravestone that would be Isstvan V. The Dropsite Massacre was truly a brutal battle, which in large part set the pace for the remainder of the Horus Heresy. However, upon the expanse of the Urgral depression on Isstvan V, the fate of empires hung on the balance, as traitor and loyal Space Marine legions clashed in a climactic struggle that would define the rest of the conflict within the world. The scene itself was a colossal clash where freshly mustered traitor legions awaited the approaching and unknowing loyalists who, despite their relative success in securing the depression, had suffered great losses to all three of the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard legions. Finding himself facing formidable combat and with his elite veterans, including some of the most advanced Terminators and Dreadnoughts of the 10th Legion, Primarch Ferrus Manus would plunge headlong into battle, with a singular vision, directly engaging Fulgrim in combat. This was seemingly out of character, as he had completely abandoned his peers, Corax and Vulcan, disregarding their warnings, and what was a strategic assault swiftly escalated into one of the largest and bloodiest conflicts of the Great Crusade, where over 60,000 Astartes warriors clashed directly against each other on the dusky plains of Isstvan V. All the while, Fulgrim watched with a grim smile as his brother Ferrus Manus finally surged forward into battle, right at the heart of the traitor's defenses. It seemed everything was going to plan. Backlit by the fiery chaos of battle, Ferrus cast a striking figure of vengeance as his silvery hands and his eyes reflected a flickering, intense brilliance. In that fleeting moment, Fulgrim anticipated Ferrus might pause to strategize with the Raven Guard and the Salamanders, which could potentially overwhelm him and turn the tide of battle in the Loyalists' favor. Unfortunately for humanity, Ferrus' relentless sense of honor and the deep betrayal by his favored brother brokered no delay, as around Fulgrim stood the last remains of the Phoenix Guard, poised to intercept the Iron Hand's brutal assault. Their golden halberds were lowered and ready to engage in combat, one that would, in almost all other circumstances, laid almost all of them and their Primarch low. As this occurred, Ferrus Manus led his Morlocks in a thunderous charge that shattered the remnants of the enemy's defenses, their black armor burnished with plates of stained blood and viscera from a myriad of traitor foes. Fulgrim's smile momentarily wavered as he beheld the depths of his brother's unending animosity, pondering how their fraternal bond had unraveled into this irreversible enmity that would lead one of them to die. As it seemed, he had hoped for some mere shred, a possibility of reconciliation, but even that too had faded, as only death would now settle their feud. As the Iron Hands advanced relentlessly, their massive Terminators, some of the most advanced in the entire galaxy, were in essence unstoppable, and lightning crackled from their clawed gauntlets. The Phoenix Guard's own practiced perfection allowed them to meet the charge with a thunderous battle cry, as amidst the chaos of halberds and lightning claws and the deafening sounds of concussive blasts, Fulgrim, the Primarch of the Emperor's Children, stood poised, observing the carnage. As he readied himself for the inevitable direct confrontation which was mere moments away between him and Ferrus Manus, and as the Dropsite Massacre would set the stage for the battle between Primarchs Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus, Ferrus would taunt Fulgrim for his betrayal and his arrogance in thinking that he and his brothers could succeed against the Emperor's might. Convinced of his brother's madness, Ferrus believed, erroneously, that the War Master's forces were on the brink of defeat, with the intermittent arrival of 4 more Loyalist legions who were poised to crush the rebellion. Fulgrim, now essentially another being altogether, was unable to contain his anticipation as he savored the moment of ultimate betrayal. Shaking his head, here he would reveal to Fulgrim the true nature of his predicament. Pointing to the northern edge of the Urgal depression, Fulgrim showed Ferrus that it was the Loyalists who had been trapped, that Fulgrim himself was mere bait for Ferrus Manus. As Ferrus saw a force larger than the initial assault wave assembled at the landing zone he, Corax, and Vulcan had created, all ready for battle. And as the battle raged on, Corax and Vulcan would attempt to lead their forces back to the drop site, struggling to drag their wounded and dead behind them, as they sought to regroup with the newly arrived brother Primarchs and the fresh legions of the second wave in order to share in the glory of defeating Horus. However, much to their surprise, despite voicing requests for medical aid and supplies, the lines of the Astartes atop the northern ridge remained eerily silent as the exhausted and battered Raven Guard and Salamanders approached within 100 meters of their supposed allies. A crucial moment occurred. Horus would unveil the full depths of the treachery. From within the black fortress that served as his lair upon the planet, a lone flare shot skyward, exploding in a hellish glow that illuminated the battlefield. The fire of betrayal would erupt as the barrels of thousands of guns of the freshly arrived second wave revealed their true loyalties. The traitorous legions turned their weapon upon their unsuspecting brothers, sealing the fate of the loyalist forces on Isvan. As Ferrus Manus looked on in stunned horror, Fulgrim, now irrecognizable, laughed at the expression in his brother's face. The forces that were supposed to be his allies, his assurance of victory, had turned, unleashing a devastating barrage on the Salamanders and the Raven Guard. In the fury of the first few moments, both Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim recognized that hundreds were killed, and more would follow as volley after volley of bolter fire and missiles would tear through the formerly unsuspecting ranks. The terrifying carnage unfolded as the retreating forces of the War Master once again turned their weapons against the warriors who had believed themselves mere moments from being victorious. The World Eaters, the Sons of Horus, and the Death Guard fell upon the veteran companies of the Iron Hands, and despite their gallant resistance, the warriors of the 10th Legion were hopelessly outnumbered and faced inevitable annihilation in almost every front. This led Ferrus Manus to bare his teeth with the same volcanic fury of his homeworld. As he turned to Fulgrim, the two Primarchs would leap at each other in a titanic clash, Ferrus wielding the now reconstructed Fireblade, and Fulgrim holding Forgebreaker. These weapons, once forged in brotherhood, now clashed in vengeance, and met in a blazing plume of energy as they traded blows with their monstrously powerful weapons. Ferrus delivering fiery slashes with his formidable blade. Unfortunately for him, each blow was countered by Fulgrim's ebony-hafted hammer. In short order, their armor became dented and damaged, torn and blackened by the ferocity of their struggle. As the battle raged on, both Primarchs inflicted deep and devastating wounds upon each other. Ferrus, pushing himself to his feet, would stagger towards the wounded Fulgrim, crying out as he brought the flaming blade down towards his brother's neck. But it seemed that this too was a ploy, as Fulgrim drew the single-edged, demonically possessed and empowered sword, the Lair Blade, and blocked the descending weapon. The undiluted power of chaos would stream from the blade, flooding Fulgrim's limbs with diabolical, previously unknown strength. As he felt his brother's surprise at the resistance, Fulgrim would manage to surge to his feet, and with a vicious strike, the silver blade dug deep into his brother's breastplate. This would lead to the Primarch of the Iron Hands to cry out, falling to his knees once again, as the weight of betrayal and the power of chaos bore down upon him. Ferrus Manus looked on in stunned horror as Fulgrim laughed at the expression on his brother's face. The forces of their supposed allies had turned, unleashing devastation upon Vulcan's and Corax's forces. In the first few moments, all the calculations that Ferrus Manus had done were thrown out the window. All the while, a terrifying carnage unfolded, and Ferrus Manus had been none the wiser and unable to stop this. As the two engaged in combat once more, Fulgrim's blade seemed to move with a life of its own as he swung it. Desperately, he tried to pull the blow, but his muscles were no longer under his control. The demonic source sliced through the genetically enhanced flesh and bone of one of the Emperor's sons. Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the Iron Hands, fell to the ground, decapitated by his brother's hands. Though Fulgrim had emerged victorious, he realized as he gazed down upon his brother's fallen, prostrate body that everything had been a lie. It was at this moment he had awoken from a long mental fog, as he was shocked by Ferris's death, and it was now that he would see everything clearly for the first time since his expedition to Laren. The horror of what he had done, the betrayals that led to many Astartes slaying each other, and the death that he had laid low upon his brother, one of the few beings in existence who could truly understand him, fell upon him. Consumed by grief, Fulgrim succumbed to a moment of weakness as he foolishly heeded the demon's whispers, which promised release in oblivion, and in that instance, the greater demon of Slaanesh was freed from the sword and fully possessed Fulgrim's body, claiming it for its own, as Fulgrim's consciousness would be trapped within a psychic prison formed within his own mind, which would then be symbolically represented as a painting of the Primarch, which would be placed in a position of honor in La Fianza, the theater of the 3rd Legion's flagship, the Pride of the Emperor. Following the traitor's victory at Isstvan V, Fulgrim would request a private audience with Horus, pleased with his brother's accomplishments, anticipating the presentation of a ghastly trophy, the severed head of Ferrus Manus as promised, and gloating over his significant triumph. At this, Horus wished to share this moment. However, the Primarch of the Emperor's children would reveal to him something unexpected, something which momentarily shook the Primarch. Fulgrim admitted that he lacked the fortitude to fulfill his oath to Horus, and had not killed Ferrus Manus himself. Instead, he had allowed another to do it for him. At that moment, the War Master realized that the figure before him was not truly his brother Fulgrim, but some sort of doppelganger. Enraged, Horus threatened the false Fulgrim, the being who had possessed his brother's body, warning it that he could crush him like a straw. The imposter, however, had no desire to engage in such fruitless combat. Horus glanced at Fulgrim's waist and relaxed momentarily upon seeing that this entity had come unarmed, indicating that violence was not its intent. The false Fulgrim declared his loyalty to Horus's cause, revealing his true identity as a creation of the Warp, a servant of the Dark Prince Slaanesh. The greater demon explained to the horrified War Master that it had claimed Fulgrim's mortal shell as his own, and found great pleasure in doing so. This was a revelation that left Horus utterly stunned, as he was confronted with the chilling reality of the corruption within his own ranks, and the nature of the powers he had allied himself to, and those who irrevocably owned his soul.